When we talk about market assessment, sizing the market is one piece of the picture, but you also need to understand how you relate to the other players in the market, in other words, your competition. We're now going to talk about 3 different approaches to competitive differentiation. But first I'll step back and note that sooner or later you're going to need to do a comprehensive competitive assessment, thinking about how many competitors are out there. Can the market support you, another player? How are competitors changing to respond to changes in the customer base, changes in technology, etc.? Who are the leaders and why are they successful? Don't just assume that because what you have is new and great, that the competitors are not going to respond. Understanding whether they're healthy and why or why not are they healthy. In other words, is this a good market to be in? Understanding what channels they're in, how they're reaching the market, how their pricing, marketing, and operations are structured, and then finally, how might they respond to you? Will they ignore you? Will they suddenly drop prices and try to drive you out? Might they, on the other hand, maybe even collaborate with you or find ways to work with you? When we think about product differentiation, one thing to think about is not just how is your product better than your competitors, but to think about what do potential and existing customers like about your competitors' products or services. Don't try to sell yourself to yourself. Understand that total picture. And this helps you understand, again, as a result of all this customer discovery you're doing, what factors are most important to buyers when they're selecting a product or service. And that may be a whole range of things like price, but also quality, innovation, timeliness, accuracy, reliability, etc. Thinking about what makes you unique, which is what we'll go into in detail, and then what differentiating features actually matter to your customers, not to you, to your customers. And I will make an aside here where one of my most frustrating interactions with students is when I ask them who their competition is and they say they have no competition because nobody does exactly what they do. That's not looking at things from your customer's perspective, because even if you are somewhat different from others, the question is the way you are different of importance to those customers? So let's look at one tool you can be using, which is very basic. It's a competitive feature chart. You often see it on the websites of different companies or in sales materials, laying out various features and how you rate relative to your competitors. This happens to be an example from former students of mine who are in the human resources recruiting space. It is very tempting in these competitive feature charts to try to lay out everything. But that's not what makes sense, because not every feature matters to your target market. Try to keep it focused on what matters to your customers. A different tool, which can be very powerful, is the bubble chart, telling a simple story about just a couple of features around your product or service versus your customers, with the bubble size indicating your market potential and your competitors' sales. And what I'd like to do now is go to the globe board to show you an example. I'd like to share with you a tool for competitive differentiation that lays out not only how you are different from your competitors, but how that difference relates to your market potential. And the term for that is you're using a bubble chart, and you're basically identifying 3 dimensions. 2 of the dimensions are on the X and Y axes of the graph. So a typical one is price versus performance. You'll be adding a 3rd dimension when you include the size of your competitors in terms of sales, as well as your size of potential market. So a common measure of performance might be quality. It might be certain features. It might be ease of use. And let's just use ease of use this time around. What you first do is lay out who are my competitors and what are their market sizes. So we'll use an example of cars. I am currently in the process of buying a new car, and one of the things that I really dislike about my current car is that the so-called infotainment system is really a pain to use. It is very confusing. If I'm not careful, I can easily get into an accident trying to manage that thing. So for that particular manufacturer, it's a decent priced car, but I would say that my ease of use is way down here. So I'll just call it Car A because I won't reveal the terribleness of the company that has created my problematic infotainment system. This has now become something that I really want to make better. And Car A is actually a pretty niche product. It's a relatively small size, and that's of markets, and that's where the third dimension comes in. The size of the bubble is the size of the market or the size of the sales. You might find in other manufacturers that they actually have a much easier to use infotainment system. But it's also in a very high-priced car, and I am unwilling to spend that money. And so, but it's important to lay that out as well. And then you have others who may be in the picture, who are somewhere along the spectrum, and the pricing may be that there are high-priced cars that have hard-to-use infotainment systems. And there might be somebody that's in the middle of the road and has a very large market. But what I want is something that's low-priced but easy to use. That's my sweet spot as a customer. And from the point of view of Car Z, the company, what you'd be saying is, am I in a spot where other people are not, and therefore I can have a niche that I can exploit, that others will not be contesting, so that even though my market might be small relative to Car X, it's still attractive. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to the Blue Ocean Strategy Framework for Actions Framework, as well as the Competitive Strategy Canvas, which is a piece of that. The basic idea here is to lay out your differentiation versus the key players currently in the market across several dimensions. First of all, what features are you actually eliminating? So not everything may matter to your target customers. Secondly, what are you reducing? What are you getting rid of to more of a threshold degree? Third, okay, now what's special about you? What are you raising? What are you adding? And finally, completely new things, new features that you might be doing or creating. And let's look at an example for this in the glow board. What I'd like to do now is show you how to map out your blue ocean, your area of uncontested space as put together in the Blue Ocean Strategy book. And the core framework has 4 elements to it. Relative to your competitors, what are you going to eliminate? What are you going to reduce? What are you going to raise or increase? And what's going to be brand new? What are you going to create? And then think a little bit about who are the key players in this space. We're using an example out of the Blue Ocean book where they talk about circuses, and they compare the traditional circus, or Ringling Brothers, versus regional circuses versus Cirque du Soleil. And what you do first is identify the key features associated with the circus. So one thing about going to Cirque du Soleil is you see a lot of spectacular stuff, but there are certain things you don't see, that you never see. And the key thing there are animal acts. So you can think about this as on the left-hand axis as offering level. There are no animal acts in Cirque du Soleil performances, but you do see some pretty amazing, or used to see some pretty amazing animal acts in Ringling Brothers circuses, and also even in smaller regional circuses. Another thing that you would see in the traditional circuses are stars. So, for instance, the amazing Wallenda family, who would be on the trapezes, were people that were associated with that particular circus. But if you go to Cirque du Soleil, you don't really know who these different people are because they're in costume and they're in roles. They are not simply playing themselves. So if you were to lay out the offering level for Ringling, they are very high on the dimensions of animal and stars. On the other hand, Cirque du Soleil is low to nothing there. And because they simply have fewer resources, whoops, let me try a different color. The regional circuses will also have animal acts, but they may not have as many. There also might be some stuff that are reduced in the circus world. So, for instance, in the Ringling Brothers circus and a lot of regional circuses, you have 3 rings. You're watching 3 acts at once, and that can be pretty cool. And our friends at Cirque du Soleil just have the one. Am I using the right color? We're going to find out. And the regional might do a similar kind of thing. On the other hand, Cirque du Soleil raises the bar in a number of different ways. They have pretty amazing costumes. And they also improve the music a whole lot. I'll put that up here. They also are creating stuff. They are creating a storyline. They are creating spectacle. So the line for Cirque du Soleil, whoops, close enough, looks like this. Meanwhile, the people at Ringling Brothers and the regionals are looking more like this. And then the question becomes the 2 places where you are redirecting resources. You got rid of animals, you got rid of stars. So you now have resources to devote to other features that may matter to your customers. So by eliminating and reducing, you're able to create a new offering that raises and creates other features that matter a lot to your customer. So here we have Cirque du Soleil which has become a worldwide phenomenon, while our friends at Ringling Brothers are experiencing bankruptcy now, and we have fewer and fewer of the regional circuses. The purpose of all this is so that you can then think, what matters in my market, in my competitive space? Where can I find my blue ocean?